So thank you for attending. We really appreciate it, particularly at 3:30. I know that's when school ends, so thanks for making it in good time. So my name is Jennifer Johns. Please feel free to call me JJ. Everybody does. So if you're typing anything in the chat, JJ is the way to go, plus it's faster. I'm here with my lovely colleague, Emily Duncan.
Hi there, everyone.
Emily and I are school improvement consultants at Mass Pathway. So our role is to work really closely with different schools to help them embed the learning model in their classrooms and also their school culture. And a really big part of our role and a part of the Mass Pathway learning model is getting schools to implement rich learning in a successful, sustainable and ongoing way so that their students and teachers really get to participate and feel the joy and the fun that rich learning brings to our classrooms. Before we properly kick off, I just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we all meet today, but also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Okay, just some housekeeping rules. Please keep yourself muted. I actually don't think you can unmute yourself, so thank you for that. Feel free to ask us questions in the chat whenever they arise. We won't necessarily answer them right away, but we'll try and get to as many of them as we can throughout the webinar itself. And there'll also be, if we still have time, an opportunity for a bit of a Q&A towards the end as well. We will ask you to participate via the chat at different points throughout the next hour or so. So if you feel like participating in a rich task and an energizer, we'd really appreciate that. It's up to you whether you want your cameras on or off. This is being recorded, so that is your decision. The only people that will get this recording are people that registered for the webinar or you guys who are actually here.
I might just mention as well, JJ, JJ and myself are coming to you from Melbourne, so we're actually both joining you from our respective homes as per the lockdown restrictions at the moment. So please bear with us if there are any sounds that that may be part of the home environment that you wouldn't necessarily expect to encounter during a webinar on rich learning.
Good point, Em. Thanks for that. So what are we going to cover in the next 50 or so minutes? The first thing we're going to do is kick off with an energizer, just to get you warmed up after a day of teaching. Then we're going to talk about the features of rich learning. We'll do that through actually a rich learning launch of a task, which Em will run through. Then we're going to move on to the values of rich learning and really what makes it worthwhile in the classroom and why we really want teachers and students to be participating and experiencing rich learning activities. Finally, there's a few takeaways that you'll get for participating and registering for this webinar, which is a couple of rich learning tasks to use with your kids and a rich learning professional learning series. So I'll go through them at the end as well. But first, let's do some maths. So as you can see here, we've got 4 playing cards, and I want you to find a reason why which one doesn't belong. Now, what you can do here, there's definitely more than one answer, and I want you to type your favourite answer in the chat and explain why that number doesn't belong. We'll give you a couple of minutes here.
If you've already thought of a reason why one of those cards doesn't belong, then now's a good time to test yourself and see if you can think of a reason why each of them doesn't belong. Should have queued up some think music, JJ.
Should have, shouldn't we?
Game show style.
Yeah. Great team. Thanks so much for sharing that. As you can see, there's so many different answers. I really think we scratched the surface. There are some more in there that I've come across before. So it's really something that's super easy to run with your students. You can just put up this slide, away you go, really get them to participate. It's quite low entry, has a really low floor. So, you know, we had some people looking at colours and we had other people looking at factors, composite numbers, people doing addition. There was lots of different things going on there and lots of different suggestions coming through, and they were all really valid and really good. These are just really great things to either break up a task that you're doing in the classroom or get your students energized at the start. Okay, we're going to look at the features of a rich learning task now. I'm not going to go through all the ones that are here in the slide just because we don't have the time, unfortunately. You will get access to these slides in the follow-up email that'll be sent by the end of the week to you all. So yeah, don't stress, you don't have to quickly write it down or anything. You'll get both the slides and the recording. So what I do want to mention though is these are definitely the things that make a task rich, and really the reason why rich learning is so critical and really an important aspect of any classroom. We really think that students need to have access to all of these so that they can develop really the skills that they need to tackle activities, feel like they can problem solve and develop different, I guess, the proficiencies of maths learning that we want them to, critical thinking, creative thinking, all those sorts of things. So my favourite feature really that's here, I think, is encouraging mathematical discourse or discussion and collaboration, as it says there. I think having students reason with each other is truly amazing. There's nothing better than when you can step back and just watch the students have a debate about their responses and ideas with each other. It really does highlight the value of what they've actually come up with, their own ideas, and encourages that deep understanding, fluency, problem solving that we actually need to address in the curriculum. But also just as life skills, they're really, really important skills that our students need. And I think developing them through rich learning will help them not only in their maths ability, but just in their life as well.
Great points there, JJ. What I'm going to do with you now is actually just launch the beginning of a rich learning task with you. So this is one of the tasks that you'll have to take away at the end of this webinar. And to participate in this task, you will need to do a little bit of mental arithmetic. So if you've got a pen and paper handy, feel free to use that. It won't be too taxing, I promise. I know we've already mentioned it's the end of a school day, so we've kept it nice and light for you. And I will ask you at some point to submit your answers through the chat, but I'd like you to hold off until I ask for them. Okay, so we want to build a little bit of suspense there. Okay. So let's get started with our maths magic trick. Alrighty, we all ready? So we're going to begin with a whole number between 1 and 10. So I'll just get you all to select your own number, somewhere between 1 and 10 to start with. We're going to add 2 to that number. Once you've added 2, I want you to multiply that new number by 2. We're then going to subtract 2. We're going to divide by 2. Sorry, I hope I'm not going too quickly. And finally, I'd like you to subtract your original number. Now, I haven't actually performed the trick yet. The trick is about to come now. I bet I can guess your answer. And I'm going to write what I think your answer is on my hand. And I'm going to hold it here so you can tell I'm not cheating. And now I'd like you to please submit your answers in the chat, and we'll see if I am the mathemagician that I think I am. How are those answers looking, JJ?
Oh, they're all looking pretty similar here, Em.
Okay, well, the proof's in the pudding, isn't it? So let's see whether I was right. Look at that. Imagine that. The answer is 1, and I was able to predict that. Let's try that again. This time I'd like you to pick another number. So choose another number. The steps are all there for you. And let's see what we get. Once you've come to your answer, again, feel free to roll those through in the chat.
We should have embedded a drum roll here.
I know we needed a drum roll, didn't we? We've got some more answers coming through. Geez, they're looking pretty similar to the first time, I've got to say. So it looks like my magic trick is holding true. Okay, so we've all got the answer 1, which is excellent to see. It's always nice when things go smoothly. So what I've just really done with you there is just the launch part of a rich learning task. And from here, we would actually, if we were going to run this with students, we would probably want to set students up with a big question that they can answer. But really, when we look at a rich learning task, it is something that's typically divided into 3 main acts. So 3 sort of phases of work for students. So the launch is really where the teacher is engaging in that purpose of play. Then we move into the work phase, and the work phase is where we actually hand over to students and they can actually engage in the actual work of doing the task itself. And then from there, we move into the wrap. Okay, and we might just look at those in a little bit more detail as well. So I mentioned just before that the launch is really an opportunity to set up an element of play. And you'll notice that I've referred to this as being a magic trick, and added a little element of fun there by actually showing you that I've performing a bit of magic. I've already guessed what your answer is going to be. And there's a wonderful quote by Dan Finkel, who has worked with us on our Rich Learning Professional Development series, and JJ will tell you a little bit more about him later. But he says that play is to maths what books are to reading. And I think that's a really nice way to highlight that playfulness with mathematics is not actually switching our brains off. Play is just a way of engaging our brains in a different way. And I think the launch of a rich learning task is the opportunity to challenge those preconceptions that students might have around play or around tasks that are fun, and setting this up as an opportunity for them to learn and stretch their brains in a different way. So as JJ pointed out earlier, some of those features of rich learning around curiosity and around critical and creative thinking really come into play when we are introducing the task during that launch phase. The next thing that I would do to facilitate this task for students would be to set them up with some sort of big question. But the key there is to give them just enough information to get started, but not too much, because I really don't want to give too much direction around where this task should end up. One of the key elements of rich learning is that we want it to have multiple exit points. So we want students to actually really take this task, make it their own, engage in that true process of exploration, and who knows where they'll end up. So when we're looking at the work phase more explicitly, that's where we have set up that big question. So for the maths magic trick, I might then have asked my students, are there any numbers where this trick won't work? Or can you find a way to break this trick? Can you find a way where I can't predict what your answer is going to be? It's then up to the students to engage any strategies or, to take this in any direction that they want to. And really, the teacher is working to enable and extend students more individually as needed. One of the other key parts of the work here is we really want to define the purpose of the task and define what success actually looks like within the task. So when we think about rich learning, the purpose is really the journey rather than the destination. So the fact that we really have those multiple exit points and students really can take this any number of places, we want to make sure that the focus on success is relating to the journey that they undertake as well. So when we're defining success within a rich learning task, we're looking at students' willingness to explore, their willingness to actually jump in and try things, their ability to make mistakes and to actually see those mistakes as an opportunity for learning and something that should be celebrated and shared, as opposed to something that they immediately want to scribble over or get the white out. I know a lot of you have probably got white out the bane of your existence because it erases all traces of thinking. The final phase of a rich learning task is the wrap. And this is a part that's often really challenging pedagogically, because quite often we see students really focused when they're in the work phase, and it can be so tempting to just let them stay there and think, okay, well, you know, there's only 10 minutes before the end of class. I'm just going to leave them. They're working so beautifully, and they're really engaged in what they're doing. So we'll just leave them to it. But the wrap is a really important aspect of rich learning. This is the part where we're encouraging students to reflect and articulate their thoughts. And as JJ mentioned earlier, that whole idea of mathematical discourse is really essential in rich learning. So it's so important to actually make time and space for that, as much as it is a challenge. And often, you know, I was one of those teachers myself that would get sprung by the bell unexpectedly, even though every period was always the same length. They always seemed to be 10 minutes shorter to me somehow. But it's really, the wrap is really where students are able to learn from each other. And it's where they're actually able to articulate the types of strategies that they've used and the types of processes that they've engaged in, which can be really beneficial in future tasks.
So Emily just went through the phases of rich learning and what really makes those phases successful. But each of those phases also has a major value that really we need to be upholding when we think about each phase of a task. So at the start, when you're launching a task, there's something should be irresistible about it right away. And we want it to spark students' curiosity. Essentially, we need to motivate them to do the work. Without that, you know, they probably won't be engaged and they won't want to move to the next phase of the work of the productive struggle. So as Emily mentioned, having a clear and concise question is really important, because you don't want to give away too much information, but you also want that question to be absolutely compelling so that they do actually want to dive into it. So we really need to think about it prior to actually starting the task. You don't sort of want to wing it as you go, because it may fall flat and the students may not have their curiosity sparked. So the more we do that, the more likely students are actually to delve into that productive struggle, which is where students really do the bulk of their actual learning. It's when they're actively participating in an activity rather than, I guess, passively listening. So moving on to that productive struggle, we want students to participate in the work, as Em mentioned, but we also need to make sure that students have what they need to be able to start the task. So even if your launch is absolutely flawless, you're like, that was amazing, it doesn't necessarily mean that all students will still be able to access it from that point. You may still need some extra scaffolding for some students. Again, we just need to be careful not to ever give away too much information, because then it could sort of kill some of that curiosity that you ignited. Also, when you are doing that scaffolding for those few students, make sure it is just with those few students that need that extra scaffolding, because other students might sort of hear that and their thinking might get pushed in a different direction, which, you know, you may not want to happen. We really want the kids to be able to take these activities wherever they want to take them and wherever they want to explore them. Similarly to that, but on the flip side, if students claim to have solved the problem in a couple of minutes, then absolutely be skeptical. We want to demand answers and be convinced by the students that they've actually solved that part of the problem. On top of that, you then need to be ready with some extending prompts or maybe a different way to vary the task, just so that the students can still participate in that productive struggle and the activity, so that 1, they're not bored, 2, they're still working and learning, and 3, they're not distracting other students. So there's lots of reasons why we need to keep students in productive struggle, but you know, the main one is so that they're actually learning. There's a few different ways when running a rich learning task to share students' ideas. Most of them will happen within the wrap, so the final part that Emily mentioned. However, there are certain parts within the productive struggle where you may actually want to pause the class for a few different reasons. 1, to share a group's method of organising, or potentially a critical observation that they've had, because this could really provide a framework for other students to keep them in that productive struggle. Maybe they're a little bit further behind and they just need that extra support, and there's no better way than to share another student's ideas or thinking, or get the students to share it themselves. Just make sure these interruptions, when they do happen in the productive struggle, infrequent and quite brief, because it's critical for teachers and other students, one, not to give away the answer, but you also want students to not get too off track if they are, going down a different thought path. And I guess the final point when we're looking at productive struggle is that we want students to be checking each other's work and really engaging in that discourse themselves, which we've mentioned a couple of times now, but it really is such a major part of rich learning, and particularly when they're in productive struggle. There's nothing better than just being able to step back and let them participate in that dialogue themselves. So, really we're not the answer key at this point, I guess. We want the students to be the answer key themselves. Now, the final part within the wrap, this is where you really can provide students with the opportunity to take ownership over their learning. They would have definitely been doing that with each other through the productive struggle, but this is really where they can just take that and own it and say, this is what I did, everyone, hear me roar kind of thing, which is really quite an impressive thing to see in the classroom. So there's a few different ways that you can tackle this. Here's just some. There's actually lots of ways you can do it. But you might get students to present their ideas to the class in a formal way. They might come up to the whiteboard and share something, or it could just be an informal chat about what people learned, noticed, or they still have questions about. Maybe they'll go home and explore it. That's the dream, isn't it? We also want, you could also get students to pair up, share their ideas with each other. This is a good way to get students that won't normally, stand up and hear me roar, to actually still get their ideas across to another student. There's nothing harder, I don't think anyway, than explaining my thinking to somebody else. So I think if they can do that, then it really shows that they have actually understood what they've been working on within their group. And so getting that paired sort of reflection is a really good way to get that thinking happening.
I think, JJ, this whole part of the ownership and the wrap is also a really nice opportunity for students to learn in unexpected pairings as well. I think quite often we can find that students who are typically perhaps at a more advanced level with their maths, sometimes they're the students who don't like having to articulate why something works. They want to be able to write down the correct answer and then move on to the next task. So it's a really good opportunity to provide the scope for those students to extend on their thinking a little bit more. And then similarly to that, I think it's often a time, because of the nature of these types of tasks and the fact that we've really opened up the scope of what success means and where students can take the tasks, it means that some of those students who potentially in a more closed task wouldn't have an answer to offer can still really share something that's quite valuable to their peers as well. So they may be able to offer a really creative idea or a really creative strategy that no one in the class had thought of, which is a wonderful moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Leading on from that a bit, is giving students credit for the arguments that they had. Even if they didn't lead them to the answer, it's still so important that they actually, came up with a conjecture, had good arguments, and really it only came about because of their perseverance and that they were able to learn from their mistakes and continue. So it is, absolutely critical that sort of learning and thinking and discourse is taking place. And really by the end of a lesson or a few rich learning lessons, they don't always just have to take a lesson. You feel free to extend them if the kids are really getting into it. We want kids to leave the lesson, or plural lessons, feeling as though they've really grown as learners and problem solvers. And this hopefully would make them feel more open to participating in rich learning tasks in the future, because they can be quite daunting at the start for students. They're not really used sometimes to thinking in this really critical way where the teacher isn't giving them the answers, or there's not just one set answer, there's multiple answers. So they can be a bit hesitant at the start, even if your launch is phenomenal. Sometimes they kind of want to get to one answer and that's it. But really once we can promote that they, are growing as learners and problem solvers, then that sort of barrier does slowly come down and they'll just want to get into them every time.
Yes, it can be hard to overcome the resistance from students who would rather just be given a roadmap. They really want that step-by-step recipe of this is what's expected. So It's worth persevering.
Absolutely. So the launch, the work, and the wrap, as Emily went through, does correlate to curiosity, productive struggle, and ownership. So this is our rich learning framework that we've come up with Dan Finkel. Just remember that when you're trying these tasks, if you're not familiar with running rich learning activities and it's not a regular part of your, I guess, classroom routine, then just make sure you're kind to yourselves and give yourselves a chance to experiment. Learn from your mistakes just as we want these students to do. But really remember that preparation is key. You need to spend, I would say, at least half an hour just going through a task, learning it for the first time, seeing where the kids might get stuck, seeing where they might need prompting, to just make sure that you have some, I guess, things ready to go for when that does happen in the class. Yeah, everyone can absolutely benefit from rich learning. We just need to believe that our students can grow as mathematical thinkers.
We can also start to introduce students to some elements of rich learning as well without needing to launch into a full-scale task. So the energizer that we ran with you at the beginning of this webinar was taken from a website called Which One Doesn't Belong. And those tasks are a great way of actually dabbling in that sense of curiosity, and they are tasks that do have multiple answers. They're tasks that do give students a sense of ownership. They're not the full-scale rich learning task which provide that scope for productive struggle while they're working on it, but it can still be a nice introduction point. So it's worth considering that using some of those rich energizers as a way of really encouraging students with this type of thinking and providing that safe space for them to make mistakes, perhaps in smaller steps rather than jumping straight in with a large scale task.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Em. It's a good stepping stone, absolutely. Does anybody have any good websites similarly to Which One Doesn't Belong or energizers that they use themselves that they want to pop in the chat? We at Maths Pathway are very much sharing is caring, and we don't want to have to reinvent the wheel every time. So if anybody uses any that they would like to share or a website they use, we'd love to get that in the chat, and then we can pop that in the email that you'll get so that everybody knows. Estimation 180, Amelia, love it. We like that one too. Really good. Just give you a minute or two to think or remember. Nice.
Math starters. Oh, Enrich. Yep, great resources at Enrich too.
Yeah, really good full rich learning activities at Enrich as well.
I think the other thing that's nice about activities like Which One Doesn't Belong is they're a great way to debunk that idea that students have about there being a correct answer. And often, when you start running full lesson rich learning tasks, there's still this mindset from students that there must be a correct solution at some point, and that they'll be told at the end of the task that they're either right or wrong. So I think bringing in more of those shorter tasks where, well, there is no right answer, there are many possible answers. I think that's a really nice way to shake up that thinking too.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we sort of move on, just before we do, I just want to make sure there's no questions. It's a very silent group. Feel free to pop any questions that you have in about rich learning, or even if you want to share a positive launch that you had, because we haven't really focused on the work or the wrap too much today. But if you've had a really good launch that worked well, or know of an activity that worked well, feel free to share in the chat as well. We'd love to hear it. There hasn't been too many Q&As, so I can move on to the takeaways. Just because we've moved on from that part doesn't mean it's closed, by the way. Still feel free to ask any questions if you have them. So what you will get from today, hopefully you've got something from just what we've just discussed in the interim anyway, but also you'll get 3 rich learning lesson plans. So one of them was the one that Em presented the launch for, so Maths Magic Trick. There's so much more to be explored than what we did today, but timing can be a bit of a challenge, and doing things through a webinar. So we really just decided that we'd do the launch just to give you that curiosity. So now you can go and explore that task yourselves, and then hopefully, even run it with your students. The other task you'll get is 1-2-NIM. This is a game. It's a really good game. It involves a lot of strategy from the kids, and it really promotes healthy competition in the classroom, particularly because the way it's presented in the rich learning, professional learning, is that the teacher is what we call the NIM master, and it is the kid's job to beat him. And obviously him or her, and obviously the NIM master knows the strategy. So they'll always win if the students don't figure it out. So it really does promote that healthy competition, because what student doesn't want to beat their teacher, really? And it's just a rich task that allows for lots of critical thinking. The third one that you'll receive is squareable numbers. This, again, it's actually an extremely rich task. There's so many different ways you can tackle this and approach this, but it really delves deep into exploring and finding patterns. That's sort of the crux of it. It's a really great activity to encourage the use of conjectures and counterexamples. So if your students aren't used to that language yet, then you can introduce it to start, promoting that mathematical conversation, which is really good. We've mentioned our lovely friend Dan Finkel a few times. So he is the founder of a company called Math for Love. He's got a PhD in mathematics. He actually lives in Seattle. So unfortunately, he won't be visiting us anytime soon from America because all our borders are locked down. But he has been to Australia a couple of times, and we've been working with him for quite a few years now. So he writes a bunch of the rich learning tasks that Maths Pathway uses. And then he's also got even more on his own website. So yeah, you may have seen him at a conference. He's been to Marwa conference a couple of times. He's been to the MAV conference a couple of times, and a few other ones, I think, around the country. So you might have seen him pop up with his deep American accent. He really does have a passion for rich learning. It's super evident in his professional learning, in his videos. He's got a TED Talk, which I would strongly encourage watching. It's very, very good. And everything he puts his mind to, he is super passionate about, which is very amazing. So I'll include a link to his, well, not me, I'm not sending it, but we'll include a link to his Math for Love website in the follow-up email that you'll get.
I popped it in the chat there as well.
Nice, Em. Very good. So he's worked really closely with us and a few of schools that implement the Maths Pathway learning model in Australia to create a series of professional learning that teachers can go through, and it unpacks in more detail the launch, sparking curiosity, the work, the productive struggle, and really digging deep into the task, as well as the wrap and how to get students to speak about their thinking. So yeah, I mean, that's all we had planned. Em, do you have any other comments or anything to add?
No, I think that's about it. I was just looking before Amelia was sharing that she's actually run some of the conjecture and counterexample tasks from Maths Pathway with her students, and they were really positively received, which is great to hear.
Nice. Amelia, just say yes or no in the chat. If I unmuted you, would you be happy to share your experience with the group?
Great. That's a
right.
Yes.
Let's unmute you, Amelia.
Hello.
Hello. Thanks for sharing.
No worries. This is my first year doing Maths Pathway, and I have a Year 5-6 class, and we've done a few of the sort of rich learning tasks that don't go in a sequence, mostly to get me warmed up, and I thought we're going to work our way through the conjecture and counterexample ones. And I had looked at it previously, and I think it's been updated because I don't remember seeing the pattern block stuff there, and they absolutely loved it. So we made a slide deck that they all accessed, and they came up with some conjectures, and then they tried to prove each other wrong as well. So we had a pattern blocks app, and as they found one that proved a conjecture wrong, they would take a screenshot and dump it on there and, show their buddy, haha, I proved you wrong. And they just thought it was really cool. I think we'll actually come back and have another go at that one because they loved it so much when we did it last Friday, that I think they want a chance to come up with more conjectures and more counterexamples for them.
Isn't that great that you're able to come back to a task because the kids really want to keep digging in? That's amazing.
Yep, they loved it. And I'm looking forward to, after we've done this one, we'll have a go at the star polygons and squareable numbers and things like that. And I think they'll love those too. And we'll build the language, and
yep,
it's awesome.
Nice. How do you go with keeping your students in productive struggle? Was that mostly done because you did such a good job of igniting their curiosity, or did you have to sort of use some strategies to keep them in that zone?
I didn't. I don't think we did it long enough that any of them got bored. And I teach all boys, and I think the competitive element of proving other people wrong made a bit of a difference. Some of the conjectures I came up with to start with, and so of course they love proving me wrong, but they equally love proving their mates wrong. And then of course they're trying to think of conjectures that couldn't be proven wrong. Some of them got a bit sneaky. We were using a digital pattern blocks app, and it uses the traditional pattern blocks colours, but you could change the colours. So when they were saying, you know, you can't build a hexagon using only blue rhombuses, they would change one of the other shapes to blue and go, oh, yeah, see, I did it. And then someone else would go, no. So we had lots of that sort of crash talk happening as well, but that was hilarious. There was some really, really good maths, really, really good spatial reasoning happening, and the language they were using to help each other out to work out how to manipulate the pattern blocks, even outside of the conjectures and counterexamples, was really cool.
Great. That's amazing. I'm glad your experiences have been positive so far, and it sounds like they'll continue to be. It sounds like the kids are really getting into it, which is amazing.
They've enjoyed a few. I've literally not won a game of hex. Literally all beaten me, so I'm really bad at that game. And I think that's pretty awesome that they can beat me. We played 1-2 Nim, and they got bored of that one a bit more quickly, but for the 20 odd minutes that we played it, they really did enjoy it. But they'd had enough after we talked about some of the strategies and they tried them out. I turned that one off a bit faster than I would have for some of the other ones. We've done Fibonacci spirals. They thought they were pretty cool. I find it's a really good way to engage the whole class in something all together, because when you do modules, there's a lot of small group work happening, but they really love the chance to work with people that they might not get to work with when they're doing their module work.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something really beautiful about rich learning is that you can have a student that is, they might be considered a high ability student. And so when they tackle a rich learning task, sometimes they just want to go really far, really early, and they either can't get there or they get confused and they start to give up. But then they have a student that might be considered a lower ability student, but they help those higher ability students quite often get to where they need to be and see the question in a different way and understand it in new eyes, which is really nice to see those different students who wouldn't normally talk to each other in the classroom, having that conversation and giving that lower ability student the opportunity to actually help somebody that they probably never would otherwise.
Yeah, and as you said in the previous slides, the pattern block is a great example of everyone can do something. I've got kids doing level 2 maths, and I've got kids doing level 7 maths, and everyone managed something in that task based on the conjectures we came up with.
Great. That's great to hear. Thanks for sharing, Amelia. Really appreciate that.
No worries.
Perfect. Well, we might give you 15 minutes of free time. always nice for teachers. I know we're always short on time. If you have any questions, we'll leave this open for the next 10 or so minutes. So if you do want to post any questions, even feel free to send them privately to myself if you're not comfortable sharing them with the group, and we'll get back to you either privately on this chat or via an email. But if not, that's it. Thanks so much for sharing, and you will get these tasks, so please have a go. And then, if you have any other questions, just feel free to email Maths Pathway and we'll get right back to you.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thank you.